you everyone for joining us today for our National Cryptologic Museum Foundation cybersecurity chat. Our guest today is Tiffany Lopez-Winters, who is a globally engaged cyber and counterintelligence expert dedicated to the national security of the U.S. She has over 20 years of global engagement and leadership in law enforcement, counterintelligence, cybersecurity policy, and resourcing. She has worked in several areas of U.S. intelligence community, from the tactical to the operational, and she is going to she's going to share with you an interesting aspect of cybersecurity. So, Tiffany, it's all yours.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. And thank you very much for the Cryptologic Museum for giving us the opportunity to sort of share. I've reviewed the curriculum, the Big Ideas curriculum that's being leveraged, and watched the YouTube videos from the professors. And I got to say, very, very impressive. And I love how all the big ideas were broke down into bite-sized chunks. So what I wanted to focus on today is trust. So in cybersecurity, we talk a lot about confidentiality, integrity, availability of our data, and there are different skill sets that are involved with each and every one of those aspects of computer network security, information security. And I thought trust was a good one, and that kind of segues into what we do at D4C Global. So what I wanted to share with you today is how our view of the world, we're sort of seeing how bad guys are impacting our ability to trust different pieces of technology, or kind of taking advantage of how we trust different pieces of technology, such as applications, for their own gain. In this case, possibly information collection that could be turned into intelligence, which could essentially be used against a corporate entity or even potentially U.S. government. And so that's sort of our example today. I took segments of this presentation from a brief that we provided at FBI InfraGard. I'm not sure how many of the teachers out there or the National Cryptological Museum has been involved with or exposed to InfraGard, but InfraGard is basically a public-private partnership concept between the Bureau of Investigations, Federal Bureau of Investigations, and industry, where we share threat information, whether it be indicators, atomic indicators of potential compromise, or geopolitical intelligence related to some of the hacks that happen across the domestic U.S. And FBI InfraGard provides industry an opportunity to share findings that they have in the commercial sector. So we prepared a briefing based on some findings that we had related to an app. The app that we're going to talk about today is Cam Scanner. And Christine asked that through the course of my discussions with you, that I sort of bring to the forefront what my background was and kind of how I got to where I am today. So our company is basically comprised of former federal law enforcement agents. I myself was a federal law enforcement agent with the United States Air Force, Office of Special Investigations, where I bridged a lot of the computer network defense activities that were happening within the department, and sort of coupling that with a little bit more of a counterintelligence mindset, which means why? Why is this happening? So today we're going to talk a little bit about cyber counterintelligence. So I have one example, and our example deals with wartime information and how some of that information could potentially be used against, in our case, some corporate examples, or in World War II, obviously the war effort. So I'm going to read a little vignette that my counterpart had put together here. So in 1940 and 1941 and 42, ships leaving American seaports had security measures to protect their departure. Yet many of their broken hulls and water-soaked cargoes had washed up on the beaches of New Jersey, Virginia, and the Carolinas, where German submarines had spotted them within sight of shore. In case after case, every man on board had been marked meaning known, before the captain even opened his orders. They thought that they may not have known it. The cargo ships they carried were insured by a company called Munich. So Munich was an insurance company. The routing system of placing the insurance had put precise information, basically think manifest, and the sailing date and the destination into the hands of the Germans before the ship even left the port. So Munich was basically a cargo insurance shipping entity during World War II. And because each one of the ships wanted to be insured, they had let these insurance policies through Munich, which exposed a lot of information to the Axis powers, obviously. So taking sort of that mindset, if you go to the next slide, in how we kind of struggle with security versus counterintelligence. So each one of these ships, they had their own port security. They had folks patrolling the ports to make sure that bad guys weren't coming and trying to sabotage any of those ships. Very similar to the route that we take in current security mindsets, such as physical security and patrolling a building, and network security, whether it be we're establishing standards and protocols and policies for how we're going to handle our information. We're updating firewalls. We are updating rules and response measures, our incident response plans consistently as we're detecting. So that's the way we look at it. Is security is basically the shield, and then counterintelligence is more of the sword. It's basically going out into the horizon and trying to understand who the adversary is, how they potentially work. And we do that with a couple of different tools. Are all credentialed private investigators in the state of Virginia. We have network security engineers on our team. We have former military intelligence officers. And so we take sort of that mindset and we use that to detect bad guy behavior, similar to what we would do with a SIM and some of those atomic indicators. But a little bit of a different perspective is if you're sitting in a security operations center, you're sort of watching everything come at you, and you're looking at security from the inside of your security operations center and your enterprise, look out, and you're looking outside of that, trying to identify what's going on. With a counterintelligence mindset, you sort of look at the outside world and what's happening, either from geopolitical, informational sphere, and you're trying to take that perspective and bringing that in. So trying to understand what the bad guy understands, what the bad guy is tracking, what type of information the bad guy is interested in, and then bringing that into your security operations center or your policies and procedures and your overall security plan to try to counter some of that activity. Counterintelligence work is a little bit more quiet than maybe some of the security work that you might see in industry today. But the one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that counterintelligence, it all comes down to two basic principles. One is we do gather a lot of information, which gives us the knowledge that we need to help counter some of that, because then we'll develop some activities to help counter what that bad guy activity might be. One thing that we consider when we are supporting a security operations center and trying to understand what the market is and what the more of the strategic threat might be to computer security enterprises would be that the concern is that a lot of the computer network security corporations are advertising what their tools and techniques might be to help counter. And so from a CI perspective, we sort of look at it as we are inadvertently providing cybersecurity battle plans and capabilities to the adversary, because it's almost like being in a boxing match and we're sort of telegraphing what our next what our next defensive move is going to be. So we try to stay a little bit more in the shadows, which is, sort of difficult. And I'm sure that you've heard a lot of the stories about how security operations centers and computer network defense, the defenders have to be right all the time, right? As the old cliche goes, the defenders have to be right all the time, and the bad guys can just, be right once, and they'll find that weak password or that cognitively weak individual who might subject themselves to a spear phishing email. So that's sort of the push-pull with the security challenges in the industry in this day and age. So some of the challenges of implementing cyber counterintelligence or counterintelligence in a security operations center is sort of the mindset. A lot of people don't understand what counterintelligence is. To execute counterintelligence effectively, it extends beyond the security operations center. And some of the work can be challenging, and it's not gratification. It's not the SIM providing an alert and then you deciding on whether or not that's a false positive or not. There's a little bit more intricacy into it. And so we bring all of our mindsets from an information operations and counterintelligence perspective to look at the problem both offensively and defensively, looking at more of the information space, and taking a lot of that information and trying to bring that into insider threat and investigations activities. So next slide. So here's our example. We're going to be talking about what are examples of this 21st century insurance manifest, like Munich insurance in World War II. So going back to our example, we had a company based in Germany who was selling insurance for shipments that were going to be, supporting the war effort. And in order to effectively provide insurance coverage for the cargo that was going to be on the ship, you'd have to provide a manifest. And on that manifest, it may include who the people are, what type of materials are being transported, the dates it's being transported, and the to and from. And so going back to our example, we had ships getting bombed and bodies washing up on shore, unfortunately. And so if you look at that in this 21st century technological age, if a bad guy wants to start collecting information about who you are or your organization as an entity or you as a person, what's an interesting way to go about doing that? Bad guys back in that day, we're talking about that manifest. Where's that critical information? It's on the manifest, and the insurance company was able to collect a lot of it. How do you get access to it? And then how do we advantage it for the war effort? So if you wanted to take out allied logistics, this might be a really smart way. So if you fast forward into the 21st century and you want to gather enough information to have an effect, whether it be on a corporate entity or a nation, you need to identify a way to bring the information to you. And in this day and age, it's super easy because we have all the TikToks of the world, and we have, in this case, Cam Scanner, which is a PDF scanning capability that you can use on a mobile device, such as a telephone. So the interesting piece to this is bad guys or anyone actually can develop an application that could bring information to you, because everything that you do on your mobile device is being captured on a regular basis. In this particular case, if you need to scan a document, we don't walk around with, big scanners anymore. You don't have to go to an office to scan a document. You can basically just take a picture on your mobile device and you can turn that into a document that can be sent anywhere. Even a couple more years, a lot of those applications are evolving into the DocuSigns and the Adobe Signs of the world, so you can sign documentation. So there's a lot of implications when it comes to how information could be gathered, not only now, but into the future. So this particular example was interesting because we had an individual in our company who was noticing during some security research that Cam Scanner wasn't acting as it typically should. And so he started digging into it a little bit more because he had been trained with that counterintelligence mindset. And the interesting part is that from a perception perspective, when you look at Cam Scanner overall, it looks as though it was being developed by a company in California. It had extremely good reviews. It was one of the top applications in the Google Play Store. It was one of the top applications in the Apple iTunes Store. Lots of, really great media reviews from CNET, Time Crunch. And initially it identified just nominal permissions to your mobile device, such as I need your device ID so that I know which device is legitimately using my app. I'm going to need access to your camera because you're going to be taking pictures of some of the documents. And I'm letting you know that I need a little bit of access to some of the storage on your device because I'm going to have to pull the documents off of that device. And as you can see here, there's some very well-known organizations who were leveraging the technology, which of course increases the potential credibility of the application itself. But if you look at it from an information perspective, the app is really a center of gravity for a lot of different sensitive data, in addition to it having some overreaching permissions, and we're going to look at that. So what we want you to do in the future is to kind of think a little bit more critically. If you're downloading an app and you're going to use it for something, pay attention to where your data goes. What are the terms of service? Are you okay with where some of that data is being processed and being sent? So in this particular case, the terms of service for CamScanner are that some of the information could be downloaded and sent to other countries, and that if that information is being sent to another country, that country is going to have to comply with the laws that are relevant within that country, and that's going to be more important in just a little bit. Additionally, with our research, we identified that the first point is like, who actually reads the terms of service? I mean, I don't know how many people we have on the call today, but I would imagine there's a very, very small majority of folks out there who are actually reading the terms of service, privacy applications to each one of the apps that you download. It'd be super time consuming, and it's very, very dense information, a lot of legalese. Yeah, so we have a comment here. Nobody reads he says that he doesn't read the terms of service. And so from an intelligence perspective, you can sort of prey on that, right? And this is something that we want you to think about as we move toward the end of the brief here. But anyway, so as we started digging into this with a counterintelligence mindset, we identified that the documents that are being scanned through the mobile scanner are actually being sent to a cloud in China, which is fine, as long as you're okay with that. One thing that folks might not know is that under the current cybersecurity laws, the Chinese government can have access to whatever information is on servers in the country of China. So if you're okay with that, that's another thing for you to consider. But we also identified some overreaching permissions, as I had spoke about before. So why would a document scanner need to have access or have a capability to record audio on the device? There doesn't really seem to a reason for that. Why does your device have to provide GPS location information? Probably not super relevant. It might be relevant for marketing, so that they know how to market you and what language to market you in, but overall, a document scanning capability, probably not. It wants to be able to manage your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capability. I don't think that's really necessary. And it does a lot of, extra collection here, as you can see. It'll do an inventory of other configured accounts, which if you look at it from a defensive perspective, it could potentially identify additional vulnerabilities in your mobile device or whatever device you have the application downloaded on, for which you can be exploited later. And so that's sort of a violation of trust there if we're not understanding exactly what permissions you have or the application has laid out for you. My background been a little bit less tech. So we had some developers and security engineers basically pull apart CamScanner in the most legal way possible to generally understand how it works. And basically we were able to understand that there was a man in the middle between the application and the remote server. According to the notes that I have here, it unwrapped the HTTPS traffic and then it would rewrap it before it was sending it out. So the man-in-the-middle proxy then used its own self-signed certificate to establish an identity for the HTTPS communication. Normally, the phone or application would distrust a self-signed certificate since it's not issued by a well-known certificate authority. However, because it added this man-in-the-middle certificate to the host phone, the phone trusted the list and the proxy, and then it was able to unwrap the phone traffic so that it could identify what information was being sent and where it was being sent. So basically, man in the middle that was identified on the phone could basically unencrypt any of the communications, read the data that was being transmitted, to include the overreach of the permissions that you essentially would have allowed when you agreed to the terms of service, and then provide all that information back to some servers that were in a nation state that maybe may not have understood that that's where that information was going to go. Additionally, if data was sent to the servers and you logged out of the app, or you shut the app off, or you split up on your phone, if it was an iPhone, information was still being sent out to the servers. And it didn't matter if you opt out of syncing your data from CamScanner back to the servers. Most applications will allow you to not sync, which means that you can leave the information locally on your phone. But in this particular case, even if you shut that off, it was still syncing your information back to the servers in China. So again, kind of looking at it from more of a who is this entity and why would they want a lot of this information from us, we later identified that when you start digging into it, that the developers of CamScanner were being sponsored basically by this company here called Insing, and their headquarters were out of Shanghai, China. And the app came out about 2011, but then by 2017 there was the China Internet Security Law, and this law requires computer network operators in the country to store data or to allow Chinese authorities to be able to review information, data, security settings, how network operations were being run. So any data that's stored in country has an implication of exposure by authorities within the country. So if we look at some history of CamScanner, like I said, it came out in 2011. Over the course of 2011 up to about 2018, 2017, 2018, people started looking at it. It gained a lot of notoriety. As we saw in the previous slides, organizations like Tesla were using it, some really big names. It was one of the top 10 document scanners on the Google Play Store and the iTunes Store. So it really kind of lulled people into this sense of security that, hey, from a CIA perspective, it has really good functionality, so I'm going to have availability for leveraging this app on a regular basis. From an integrity perspective, it seems to be working in a very sound manner, so I'm not going to have to worry about it if all of these other large organizations are leveraging it. And from a confidentiality perspective, on the surface at least, based on how it had marketed itself and that it looks like it's coming from a company in the US, none of my information isn't going to be exposed. By 2019, Kaspersky took a look at it, and the app had been removed because there was some type of malware or overreach identified. And so the Google Play Store removed it from the store for a period of about a week. They updated the SDK and then reposted it about, I think, a week and a half later, which is sort of interesting from a CI perspective, because if a third-party organization took a look at it, identified that there was a potential issue, Google's Play Store removed it, then the company itself, CamScanner, took a look at it, but then put the app back on the Play Store. Did it fix any of those overreaching permissions, like allowing you to record audio and consistently identifying what your geolocation is? We don't know. Someone else would have to pull it apart, or I would have to ask my engineers to sort of pull it apart again to see. But it's interesting to wonder as to whether or not this sort of helps perpetuate there's still nothing to see here, because whatever we did find, we fixed it. And so now we're putting it back into the Play Store. But then by 2020, you can see that other countries were sort of starting to understand that there might be some integrity issues with some of the apps that are being downloaded and where your information is going and how those applications are being used to collect information and data points on you. And so by 2020 there, India had banned CamScanner along with 58 other applications. So this is a little bit of a build slide. We'll give you some examples of our research findings in 2018. This information was actually found, was publicly available, and it was not hard to find it all whatsoever once you understood how the back end of CamScanner worked. And if you put in the right search terms in Google, you could actually pull up the documents that that I'm going to show you today. So you'll start to get a sense of how this violation of trust could really start to build. So going back to our wartime example, boats aren't sinking, but there's still opportunity for information to be used for malicious purposes. Okay, so we did find U.S. military travel vouchers online that were being scanned by CamScanner and sent to military organizations for military personnel who were traveling overseas. So this was an example of some attorney correspondence. We found some domestic international passports and driver's license. This is the driver's license of an individual in Venezuela. Next. Contact information for a vice chair of a major political party. You'll see that illustrated the next slide here. So with that information, I'm sure you've seen in the news about how the Democratic and Republican, campaign committees for each side had been hacked for many years now, back and forth. Through applications like this and through these types of disclosures, you would now have a disambiguated email address for a potential important person in a political party for which you could potentially use for a spear phishing campaign. Personal information such as bank statements and payment receipts. This was someone's national bank account information as they were trying to pay their gas bill. College exams and college exam answers. So this was the answer key to some class that was being taken by a particular student. U.S. congressional documents that had been unredacted. So this is pretty concerning as well, provides some indications of political leanings and possible decision making, probably prior to the information being publicly released. Typically, this type of information is embargoed from press reporting until it is approved for release. And that's about how we felt when we identified some of these findings. So from an intel counter-intel perspective, how can some of this information be used? So the military travel vouchers obviously provides an operational security risk to any of the individuals who are traveling. It identifies a lot of personally identifiable information about those U.S. military people who are traveling, and it sort of mirrors the whole, insurance manifest, right? So you have a unit, who's on the ship or the airplane, where they're traveling to, the dates, locations. Probably not real good for military planning. If it was wartime, it could potentially be catastrophic and possibly cause the loss of service members. Attorney-client privilege type of information, if it's egregious enough, could potentially be used for blackmail. Some of the other personally identifiable information, we already have enough issues and disruption in our lives. Our personal information being stolen and being used fraudulently against us. I don't know about any of you out there, but I've had several fraudulent activities against me, and it probably has taken at least 4 man-days out of my life in a year to try to rectify when those incidents happen. So that can cause some disruptions in your corporate workforce or even government workforce. So any of the information that is that can be gathered can very uniquely be used against an organization. Imagine if this was corporate documents or the chief information security officer for a potential, Fortune 10 company. And now as a bad guy, I have his bank account information. I have his gas account information. I could potentially provide, offer or develop some skullduggery against that particular individual, and or disrupt, not only his life, but start creating a ripple effect across the security operations for that particular company if I was egregious enough, right? And of course, from a counterintelligence perspective, we want to identify those things and stop them before they actually happen. How does counterintelligence neutralize the threat? So I think we kind of hit on this quite a bit. Next build here. In this particular case with CamScanner, we identified the app's functionality and we thought about it and tried to understand who actually developed this application. Why would they? What is the root of the parent organizations for this potential app? How could this application be used to collect data in a very robust way? How could that information be used, basically against us? So from a CI perspective, we talked about the difference between security and CI and counterintel. And counterintel, there's two main practices. One is to gather information, and then two is to create activities to counter the action that's being the negative action that's being directed toward whatever it is you're protecting. And so we gathered the information and we identified who the owners were of the particular app. And then from the activities that we conducted, we wrote a white paper and we did the talk at InfraGard. And now we're kind of sharing with you guys today what those risks to data collection could be and what the threat is to privacy overreach on some of the applications. Specifically, if it's coming from a foreign-based organization, because if you look at it from a nation-state perspective, each nation-state wants to gain an informational advantage. If it was a corporate entity, that corporate entity might be wanting to develop a competitive advantage for themselves. And so they may develop applications or software that might provide them an opportunity to gather information to give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So here's just a little infographic of essentially what our investigation uncovered specifically about CamScanner. So if you look at it from this perspective, a regular user going to the Google Play Store or the Apple Store is going to see CamScanner and say, oh, this is a very highly reviewed and highly regarded application. It's being built by a company out of California. Yeah, it's going to have I'm going to have to give it some permissions such as camera and storage and maybe some other, logical type of permissions on my mobile device so that I can use it effectively. I do understand that it's generally going to store information in a cloud. I might think that the information is going to be stored maybe in the domestic US, but I'm not going to understand that it's being stored in China unless I actually read the terms of service. But how many people actually read the terms of service anyway? And then if you look at the other side, that information is actually going to be sent to servers in China, and it could be used for all kinds of other reasons that could provide their government with some advantages. So what do we want you guys to do? First of all, I appreciate you guys walking through this little story with me. This is sort of the first time I've had to give a story all by myself. And my security engineers were the ones that typically gave it the first time. Second of all, I appreciate you guys working with us or understanding from a technology perspective that I don't use Zoom on my corporate accounts for other counterintelligence reasons. And so, Christine, I appreciate you helping me out with the technical pieces of it. And then, in closing, what we really want you to do is think critically when you're downloading those apps. We want you to sort of take an advisement, ask yourself those questions. Where's my information going to be stored? Who's going to have access to my information? As you're going through your cybersecurity curriculum, maybe you get curious one day and you take an application and you start pulling it apart a little bit and throwing some of the traffic into, Wireshark and, taking a look at what that traffic looks like. Read the terms of service and the privacy statements for the apps that you're going to download. And then basically, from a citizen perspective, pay attention to some of the geopolitical landscape and what's going on, because those who, they say that information is power, and we're going through a lot of machinations in the technology industry to harness data, understand data, artificial intelligence, all of those things, they all play a role.
Thank you. I know we're getting close to closing time, or the end of our chat. There was one of the students had said, or wrote, I don't ever read the terms of service. So based on your talk, it sounds like we all need to start paying attention to our terms of service.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a little bit more than we probably are these days.
Anyone have any other questions that they have?
What can our high school students do to prepare for a career in the cybersecurity sector?
Everyone's path is going to be different. My path was out of the military. I was trained as a computer crime investigator for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. The certifications are really big in this day and age. So I think the AP students who are going through the current curriculum through the CCEI is an excellent start. The foundation that CCEI has created is, in my professional opinion, outstanding. I think finding out who you are and what you are interested in as far as hardware, understanding computer hardware versus understanding computer software early on is really going to help frame the direction that you take. Because it's a little bit different mindset. And then understanding, are you more of a bits and bytes, like logical type of person versus are you more of a cognitive sort of, I call it layer 8, but the OSI model layer 8, like sort of the mind and understanding how technology could be used, for the better or for the worse, which is sort of where I sit. I'm not so much a technical wonk, but starting out with that foundation of, do I want to focus on hardware? Do I want to focus on software? Because either way, the way you understand coding is different. The way you understand managing data is different. And the way you understand leveraging hardware toward a specific end state is different. And then I would also consider pursuing, degrees are excellent, but if you want to be a practitioner, gaining those certificates maybe early, maybe like an A+ certificate while you're in high school, it's pretty simple, would be great. A really good foundation.
Thank you. And Ms. Foley, I'd also like you to just remind you that there is, of course, the high school cybersecurity curriculum guidelines, to which Tiffany was referring to as well, that if you haven't taken a look at those might be helpful as well in helping some of the students, kind of consider cybersecurity as an area that they might want to study as they move along in middle school and high school, and as well while they're in college. I hope that was helpful for you. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was a fabulous presentation. And again, I learned so much, and I hope that the students did as well. We want to thank you all for joining us for the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation's Cybersecurity Chat, and we hope to see you again next week.